Hello, it's Tim Linder. Let's talk about the type tool inside of Photoshop. So if I come to Photoshop and I look down and I grab my type tool, I notice I've got my type options up here at the top, and I can create type in a couple of different ways. One of the ways is point type. So if I just click and start typing, I'll get some letters, and notice that the type I've got in here is quite small at the time, and it's dictated by color and font and style and those sort of things by the choices and size by the choices that are up here at the top. So if I also notice that when I create a type layer, I get a special layer down here toward the bottom that gives me a little T in it, and it indicates that this is a new type layer. So it doesn't like create the type right on that specific layer. I'm going to go ahead and delete this and start over again. I'm going to get my type tool. And I also noticed that if I hold my type tool and get these other like vertical type tools and my mask, I use this top type tool 99.9% of the time, and I would imagine most other people do as well. You can get vertical type and you can get selections of vertical type after you've created your type this way anyway, so those aren't that popular of choices. So before I create this section of type, I'm going to go ahead and change my size up a little bit more, and I've got a 31 point, maybe even bigger. Let's make it really large. And I have a black as the color. Let's say I change my color to red or something like that, and I start to type now. I get some type. You also notice there, I'm going to delete this again. If I just click, I get some lorem ipsum, which is just basically a just kind of placeholder text in typography, right? So I can create this type with whatever choices I have up here at the top, and with whatever color I have chosen up here at the top. Also notice that formatting and those sort of things is center or left or right justified. Now I was creating point type, so if I create point type, it just goes on and on and on and on and on all the way off the page. I have to hit the return key to carry over to the next line, right? On and on and on and on, right? Same type layer. Now, that was point type. If I click and drag with the type tool, I get a bounding box, and this would be paragraph type, which automatically is populated by the lorem ipsum type, but as soon as I start typing, it's going to start creating new text within there, and it's going to wrap automatically to the size of that bounding box. If I can continue to have my type tool chosen, notice I've got this bounding box with the little anchor points, and I can change those, and the type will wrap inside of that box. If I create the box a little too small for whatever type that I've got, I notice that it gives a little a little plus sign showing, oh, there's more type in there, there's more characters in there, that is what is actually showing, till I make the box big enough to include everything, and then that goes away, right? So another thing that I can do is, if I were to get my move tool, I can grab my type, I can hit edit transform, or I could show my transform controls, and I can get a similar box that doesn't have those dotted lines, but this actually scales my type. If I hold shift, I can squish and squash it, or if I move outside the box, I can rotate it and things like that, all while still being, if I get my type tool, editable. So I could come back in there and still highlight my text, and I can edit this text within this paragraph, or if I did point type, I can still edit it or change the color or make any adjustments that I wanted to make with type style or whatever it might be. I can choose that, right? So one of the things that you might run into is that you want to do something different with your type. So adjustment layers and things like that, if I were to create an adjustment layer, obviously that's going to affect my type. So if I go down here, you're not seeing it underneath there, but I'm creating a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and that's going to affect my type just as it would any other layer. But if I were to go up to image adjust, I noticed some of these options aren't there. And if I go to things like filter, let's say that I wanted to blur this with a Gaussian blur and blur this type layer, it's going to say, hey, do you want to convert it to a smart object or rasterize it? We haven't necessarily talked about smart objects too much yet, but if I wanted to rasterize it, I'd say, okay, why not? Let's rasterize it and do that. And so I'm able to blur this typography, or I'm able to adjust it with different tools and things like that, warping or those grayed out options if I were to rasterize that top. But unfortunately, I'm unable to go back in and edit. It's not an editable type layer anymore. It's more of an image of the type. So I'm going to undo that, okay? So one of the things that you could consider doing is a smart object layer. So let's say I create some type, and then I were to say, all right, I want to blur this, or I could do it manually right here, convert to smart object. Or if I went to say, hey, let's filter, let's blur this, Gaussian blur, let's convert it to a smart object, and I'll choose OK. So now this is blurred. I blurred it with this Gaussian blur, and I'm able to go back in and, actually adjust it. So it's really nice. It's kind of a file built within a layer. And so this is what this little icon here, it shows me that it still contains the original data that was in that original data before, that original type layer, before I turned it into a smart object. If I were to double click on that, look at this. I open it up and it's a wholly different file. Notice there's two tabs. This was it. This was it kind of exploded out of that layer where it's still a type layer. I could go back in and make edits and things like that. So let's say I change this to green and I choose edit or file save, and I save that smart object layer, and automatically if I jump over here, notice it made the update automatically. I mean, I can go out here and I can change, and it's going to make updates automatically as soon as I hit save. Watch, I'll hit Command S, save, and that automatically updated it in my original. So this is kind of a file built within that layer, a smart object layer, right, that I could make adjustments to, and allows me to get into that sort of, add these things that I normally wouldn't. So you could rasterize a layer, or you could turn it into smart object layer. Probably a smart object would be a better choice because you can always go back in there and re-edit your text, and it retains that. Now, a couple other things that I wanted to share, that if you get some type here, I'm going to create some really large, even larger type here, some lorem ipsum type. And one of the options, if I've got my type here, is whether it's crisp or the anti-aliasing around the edge. And you may not even notice from a distance, but if I were to zoom in, or you print these sort of things around, I noticed kind of particularly around kind of a round letter form here. If I get into my type here, it's how those edges are kind of softened around the edge. If I don't have any and I just turn anti-aliasing all the way off, it's going to look, definitely would probably notice that from out here. It's going to look either the pixel's red or it isn't. There's not kind of a soft buffer around the edge there. So that would what this anti-aliasing would be used from. And these other ones just have a little bit of difference there. So I could make these sort of adjustments with my typography and that sort of effect. So that, make sure I don't, make sure I don't forget anything. I'm looking at my notes, and I think that's about it for the basics of the type tool.